The 2.4 GHz controllers featured in today's review were provided courtesy of RetroBit. RetroBit closed out 2019 strong with the release of their Bluetooth and 2.4 GHz Sega controllers. Finally, Sega fans could play both the Sega Genesis and, for the first time, Sega Saturn wirelessly, using authentic Sega-style controllers. If you have been following my channel, you have probably already seen my coverage of the Bluetooth controllers. If not, click here, because they are awesome. But the time has finally come to give the 2.4 GHz versions of the controllers the spotlight they deserve. When you pick up a RetroBit 2.4 GHz controller, you are treated to an authentic box inspired by the original Sega boxes from the 90s, seal of quality and all. Even with this being the third iteration of these controllers I have reviewed, I still love the extra touches RetroBit puts into these boxes with the glossy and embossed elements. Honestly, if not for the RetroBit logo, you would think that Sega themselves had released this in the here and now. As awesome as the outer box continues to be with each release, it's what's inside that is truly jaw-dropping. Rather than have a typical plastic housing that keeps the controller and cords in place, RetroBit has crafted a custom carrying case to house everything. It is thick, sturdy, and awesome to look at. The Japanese I Heart Retro emblem in the top left is also an interesting touch and adds just that much more to the uniqueness. Inside the case is the controller, a wireless receiver for the original console of which you picked up, an additional wireless USB receiver, micro USB cable, user manual, and finally a slick thank you note from RetroBit. The inclusion of both receivers to get the most out of these controllers is an incredible value and one I feel most companies these days just wouldn't typically do. At first glance, you can easily mistake these controllers for the original wired controllers for the Sega Genesis and Saturn. Obviously the cord is missing, but traces of its presence remain with the molds used to make the controller still bearing the cord housings. D-pad, face, and start buttons are all in their proper place and have an authentic feel. New buttons have been added with Select and Home and the addition of 2 shoulder buttons in Genesis's case. I'm not sure if anyone else will find this as interesting as I do, but these new Select and Home buttons have their emblems carved into them on the 2.4 GHz controllers, whereas the Bluetooth versions use a printed emblem. I mean, it doesn't change usability in the slightest, just an interesting difference. The backs of each controller are a bit thicker than wired versions to accommodate the inclusion of a 500 mAh rechargeable battery. It is subtle enough that you might not even notice until you compare the two side by side. A micro USB port resides at the top of the controller for charging with a single LED indicator next to it. Sorry, no player indicators on these guys like the Bluetooth versions. Rumble motors have also been left out for the 2.4 GHz versions. This does mean that the D-pad on the 2.4 GHz Genesis controller is the proper height unlike the Bluetooth version. Not that this affected gameplay at all, but purists be purist. You know who you all are. The 2.4 GHz controllers share many of the same features as their Bluetooth brethren, but one thing they can do out of the box is support original consoles and a wide variety of USB-capable systems. The 2.4 GHz controllers are compatible with the Sega Genesis, Sega Saturn, Sega Genesis Mini, PC including both X-input and direct input modes, Mac, PlayStation 3, Android, and Nintendo Switch. Getting the controller set up for each platform is a breeze and only takes seconds before you are ready to game. Before you begin playing though, I do recommend that you update your receivers. RetroBit is committed to supporting these controllers well into the future, and as such, new firmware comes out to fix bugs and improve performance. As of this video, a patch has been made available for each receiver type to address a few reported issues and improve latency. To get the newest updates, head over to RetroBit's website, click Support, then Controllers, and grab the firmware for the receiver type you need. Instructions for how to apply the updates are included in the downloads. It is an easy and straightforward process. Now, real console support was the major selling point to me on the 2.4 GHz controllers, especially for Saturn. Up to this point, no wireless options have existed for Saturn, and finally being able to play it wirelessly is fantastic. The 2.4 GHz transmission also ensures that there is no noticeable input lag, which I quickly put to the test in Mega Man X4. Comparing it to the wired options I have around, everything felt exactly like it should with no hint at latency. For older games developed with CRTs in mind, this is a very important feature. When you press jump, you want to jump. Which is why there has been a bit of bemoaning at Bluetooth controllers lately thanks to Bluetooth protocol adding latency to controls. Each person is susceptible to input lag differently though, and I personally have never had an issue with Bluetooth controllers on retro systems. I still employ a number of Bluetooth controllers and can't wait to try out RetroBit's new Bluetooth receivers when I get an opportunity. But for those of you out there who can feel the latency or just want the best possible performance, 2.4 GHz controllers are going to be your go-to. The controllers themselves handle games very well. Buttons feel great to press, the D-pad is accurate, and shoulder buttons are the best RetroBit has put out yet on their Sega line. After a number of hours of use, I have yet to encounter a single issue. I know that there have been reports of some controllers getting a stuck C button out there. If you pick up a controller and that happens, shoot RetroBit an email and they will be more than happy to fix you right up. Why do I bring this up? Because I think it is important for people to feel secure with their investments, and RetroBit is providing that security. Okay, back to gameplay. Real consoles are where I spent the majority of my time with RetroBit's 2.4 GHz controllers. Again, I was really excited to finally have a way to play Saturn games wirelessly. On Genesis though, wireless options have already existed from 8-bit DOE. Before I received the RetroBit 2.4 GHz controller, the 8-bit DOE M30 2.4 GHz version was my primary Genesis controller. I am happy to report that the usability between the two is indistinguishable to my senses. Though 8-bit DOE's design is vastly more comfortable than that of a Sega Genesis 6-button controller, of which RetroBit's controllers are based. That being said, it does not beat the Sega Saturn controller. RetroBit's receivers allow you to connect any of their 2.4 GHz controllers to them, and it brings me another step closer to replacing all of my retro console controllers with Sega Saturn controllers. Wait, sorry, my mad scientist escaped there for a bit. Cross-compatibility is an exceptional feature and one I am glad RetroBit decided to include. Seriously, using the RetroBit 2.4 GHz controllers on real hardware has been a flawless experience, and based on that alone, everyone should pick up these controllers. But there is so much more you can do with them thanks to the inclusion of a USB receiver in the box. Hooking the controllers up to PC has allowed me to once again enjoy a range of fighting games on a proper 6-button pad flawlessly. But I am kind of getting tired of doing the same testing each review, so I decided to go to left field with RetroBit's controllers and decided to see if they would work on some true retro gaming under Windows 98. To my utter amazement, it worked right out of the box after pulling a joystick driver from the Windows 98 disk. Since most games of this era were built around this type of input from Microsoft Sidewinder days, the RetroBit controllers are absolutely perfect for it. Plus, they are way more comfortable than a Sidewinder. The Pentium 3 build I have is a dual boot system with Windows XP, so I was able to confirm the controller again works natively with the outdated OS. I did have to install the Xbox 360 controller driver first though. Anyway, there are a number of games well suited for these controllers, but since when have I ever shown off games suited to the device I am using? Instead, I have loaded up Halo and mapped what buttons were available to the game's commands and went to town. It can be done, but unless you are a fellow maniac like myself, I don't really recommend doing it. Moving on to what most normal users out there will probably use the controllers for, I did try out a number of Switch titles. Like the Bluetooth versions of the controllers, a number of macros can be used to change how the controller functions on Switch, like swapping the D-pad into one of the thumbsticks or changing the face buttons. By default, the face buttons are mapped into a proper Nintendo-esque input. Heads up, this does mean the name of the button won't match what is shown on the controller. Switch titles worked as expected for a controller with no thumbsticks. I still found a great deal of use for it in games like Sonic Mania or the Genesis version of The Lion King. I honestly didn't spend the most time with the controllers on Switch as I was more excited to plug them into the PS3. Unlike the Bluetooth variants, these are proper wireless controllers that I wanted to try out with some PS1 gaming. Unfortunately, that dream got crushed instantly, as for whatever reason, the D-pad absolutely refused to be recognized in any of my PS1 classics. No matter what settings I tried or macros I swapped, nothing happened. Poor Mega Man could only jump and shoot. The home button also didn't work to get me back to the XMB. Just so you all know, the controller works exactly as it should for PS3 games, besides the home button. Now, I wanted to touch on battery life real quick. Each 2.4 GHz controller comes equipped with a 500 mAh battery that should give you roughly 30 hours of gameplay per charge. In my testing, I have landed around this mark before the controller would start to disconnect and not stay on longer than 10 seconds. Each controller features a sleep mode to help save on battery life, so after 5 minutes of inactivity, it will turn the controller off. Depending on how much you play with them, you can easily go a week before needing a charge. Even with so many systems supported and performance being as top-notch as it is, there are things I wish the RetroBit 2.4 GHz controllers had that the Bluetooth versions did. First up is the player number indicator. Because the controller uses a dongle, it just isn't possible for the feature to be on the controller. Really, it doesn't do much of anything at all, but I like having it, especially on Switch. The lack of rumble motors for PC and Switch was also noticeable to me, as I have always been a huge fan of the feature ever since I first played Star Fox 64 way back when. Lastly, I wish that the LED indicator on the controller would flash or do something when you input a macro to change functions when using the USB receiver. I have often done the macros incorrectly, and the only way to know is to push a button and hope it went through. Lastly, I hope a future update can fix the home button and D-pad functionality on PS3. The 2.4 GHz Sega controllers are RetroBit's love letter to the retro gaming community. They are a perfect wireless alternative for two of Sega's platforms, and going above and beyond, RetroBit even included a USB receiver to give the controllers extra uses. I didn't test the controllers on every compatible system this time around, but from the ones I did test, there was one constant thing. The controllers performed beautifully and as expected. Latency was non-existent and buttons responsive. Shoot, there were even plenty of times I was taken aback by what the controllers would do. Seriously, Windows 98? That had no right to work, yet it did. While there are still things I hope can be addressed in future firmware updates, none should be a deal breaker to anyone out there. Well, unless you really wanted to play PS1 games on PS3, I guess. Anyways, know that if you pick up a RetroBit 2.4 GHz controller, you are making a sound investment that will treat you well. Thank you all so much for making it to the end of today's review. I had a blast testing out the 2.4 GHz controllers. I spent a long time with these controllers because I wasn't doing any video production for a few weeks after our recent baby was born this past November. And quite literally everything I threw at it worked great. So if you were hoping to pick these controllers up, know that they are just fantastic. Thank you again to RetroBit for sending these controllers my way, and I apologize once again for the delay on getting this video out. But anyway, I think that's enough for me for today. If you haven't already, make sure you hit that sub button, that like or dislike button, depending how much you like today's video. And if you'd like to further help support the channel, you can click that join button here on YouTube or that Patreon link in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. For as little as $1, you can directly support the channel, which in turn lets me bring more content like this directly to you. As always, I am grateful for your consideration, and for everyone that has already joined me, thank you so much. You are helping me take care of me and mine. I cannot send enough gratitude your way. But until next time, stay awesome, and we will see you all back next video.